Well, hello, everybody.
No, just
oh, sorry.
good to go?
Okay. Thank you. Hello, everybody. We're here today to announce that I will be, as Government House Leader, calling back the legislature tomorrow. Notices went out to all members of the legislature yesterday afternoon and to the Speaker's office after consultation with the official opposition. We continue to manage through the COVID-19 pandemic and, of course, the OPEC price wars, which are causing significant problems for Albertans all across the province. These are dire times for our province and its people. We know that Albertans are resilient, though, and we know that we need to show that government continues to have the back of the people of this great province. The primary reason I'm calling back the House is we will be introducing Bill 14, which is the Utility Payment Deferral Program Act. On March 18, 2020, the Government of Alberta announced measures to provide immediate financial relief for Albertans. Among the measures is one regarding utility bills. Residential, farm, and small commercial customers can defer bill payments for electricity and natural gas until June 18, 2020. The program is intended for Albertans who are experiencing financial hardship as a direct result of COVID-19. For example, those who have lost their employment or have had to leave work to take care of an ill family member. Customers need to contact their utility directly to sign up for this deferral program, and customers will still have to pay for the deferred electricity and natural gas bills after the program ends. The reality is, though, we think this is an important step forward to help Albertans during this period of time. At the same time, as we open up the House, I will be also bringing back Bill number 13, which was the bill that we closed the legislature on last time that we met, the Emergency Management Amendment Act, which currently sits inside Committee of the Whole, and it is our intention to complete that work in the coming week. And this week, I hope that it is passed before this weekend when members return home. Some of you will remember that we worked on the Emergency Management Act in the early days of the pandemic to be able to put in measures that will help, or we're allowing us to have emergencies managed by both municipalities and the provinces at the same time because of the unique circumstance that we found ourselves in with a provincial pandemic and several emergencies taking place throughout the province, or at least the fact that we anticipated several emergencies may take place simultaneously, and the province did not want to take control of every emergency. And unfortunately, we did see that in communities like Fort Vermilion and Fort McMurray in the last couple of weeks, where we were able to maintain the provincial emergency around the pandemic, but then allow them to manage their local emergencies in regards to flooding. So we will be bringing back Bill 13 to make amendments that after we did the last Emergency Management Act changes that municipalities asked us to do to make their process easier. At the same time, it is my intention to call Bill 3, which is the Mobile Home Site Tenancy Act, with giving mobile home owners the same processes as you see with the regular Landlord Tenancy Act process, and we've been working on that in the legislature for several weeks, off and on, when we have been sitting, and it's my intention to try to complete that this week. And then lastly will be Bill, actually make sure I got the bill numbers right, but it will be Bill 8, which is the Human Trafficking Act bill that the legislature has been working on for the last several weeks as well. So that will be our primary focus for the next 4 days. We also intend to move a government motion in regards to the federal gun ban that was announced on Friday of this last week. We will have more details to say on that in the coming days, but the Alberta legislature will respond, making it clear that we stand with Alberta gun owners, and we will begin to have a discussion to find out what options are best available for the province of Alberta to stand up for Alberta gun owners, Alberta law-abiding gun owners in the coming days. And with that, I'd be happy to take some questions.
Okay, we'll go to the phones. We'll do one question, one follow-up.
Our first question comes from Joey Splatlery of TTV. Your line is open.
Good afternoon. My question is actually about provincial parks. I know many were expecting the province to release its plan when it comes to handing off management of provincial parks. I'm just wondering why that hasn't been released yet and when we can expect it.
Well, first off, nobody is handing off provincial parks to anybody. What is taking place increasing opportunities for partnerships with the management of our provincial parks. The reality is that's something that's taken place within the province of Alberta for a long time. We partner with private contractors as well as with municipalities and Indigenous groups. And as part of Budget 2020, we did indicate another 164 sites, which we thought would be primed to be able to be managed in a more efficient and effective way and provide a better service for the people that utilize those parks by partnering with other community members. And so we opened that up for conversation. I want to be clear. Alberta Environment has always said they will continue to run those 164 sites fully, and they are fully funded within the budget, but we're open to having conversations. We've had a lot of response to that, and in the coming days, obviously we've had to make some adjustments as we manage the COVID situation inside parks, but in the coming days and weeks, we'll continue to have those conversations with potential partners, and we'll have more to say as those conversations develop.
Do you have a follow-up, Joey?
Well, thank you.
Excellent. I'm going to go to the second call.
Our next question comes from Dean Bennett of the Canadian Press. Your line is open.
Oh, hello, Minister. What are we doing with Bill 10? The Premier mentioned recently that you may bring it back for some amendments, given that there's some concerns about ministerial overreach and sunset clauses. Have you decided not to, or where are we at with the bill, sir?
No, let me be very clear. We will be bringing forward amendments to the Act. Bill 10 was amendments of itself to the Act, and it's clear that we've seen some things that exist within the Act that concern us. The Act predates everybody who is in the legislature by a long period of time. And the reality is, by bringing Bill 10 forward, we highlighted some of the concerns that Albertans have, and us, quite frankly, with portions of the Act. And so we continue to work towards those amendments, as the Premier stated. I just don't think we're quite ready to bring that bill this week. My hope would be if we do sit next week, we may be ready by then. But our big goal right now will be to make sure that we got that right, that we have the amendments correct to that bill. Opening up the Act is only happens every 10 or 20 years, it appears. So we want to make sure that we don't have to do that too many times. And given that we already did that with Bill 10, and then ultimately probably miss portions of the Act that we think should be changed, I want to make sure I'm giving our teams enough time to be able to do that right. But before the end of this spring sitting or summer extended sitting, I do intend that Bill 10 and the Public Act will be re-amended again to deal with some of the concerns, the Public Health Act, I should say, sorry, and I anticipate that will be sooner than later.
Do you have a follow-up, Dean?
Just, I know you can't speak too much about legislation not before the House, but what will you be addressing with these amendments, Minister? Like, do you agree with like there seems to be three issues: the notification, sunset clause, and the ministerial overreach? Can you just at least get a sense of what you will be addressing in these amendments?
I think, Dean, those are all three concerns that we share as members of the legislature. The reality is that we want to have a look at the entire Act and have a legitimate conversation about the powers that it gives to ministers and whether or not there's enough oversight to that process. Most of those powers existed already in the legislation, I want to be clear, prior to Bill 10. But the reality is this is an opportunity for us to look at the entire process. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that that ultimately ministers and the legislature, decisions that are made during an emergency receive as much oversight from the Alberta legislature as possible. That's the democratically elected body that was chosen by the people of Alberta and should be making decisions. And in the rare circumstance where a minister in an emergency has to make a decision fast for the people of Alberta, and you can't obviously call back the legislature at that speed, then there should be a very quick process that ultimately makes sure that the democratically elected body has the ultimate say. And so the ministerial powers that are used should be very temporary and ultimately go back to the legislature. And that's our goal with what we do, as the Premier has already outlined. And that's more complicated probably than it sounds when you start to talk about redrawing up an Act that has existed for many decades. And so that's why we want to make sure we take the time in the coming days to make sure we got it right.
Okay, we'll go to the next question, please.
Our next question comes from Catherine Kurkowski of Alberta Today. Your line is open.
Good afternoon, Minister. You had mentioned in there that about a spring session possibly extending into the summer. And, of course, the province is working on a relaunch strategy. I'm wondering, have you got any guidance as to when the legislature will be closer to back to normal?
So we haven't made a decision when the legislature will go back to the full course of normal. I want to be clear that it is my intention and the intention of the government to ultimately pass the entire spring portion of our mandate. The reality is that we've had to make some adjustments because of what was taking place with the pandemic, which is clearly going to call for an increased session where we have to sit either later this spring and I suspect ultimately into the early summer. But we will be taking the time to make sure that we pass all the legislation that we intended to pass this spring. That way we don't plug up the legislature this fall as we continue to move forward with the mandate that Albertans elected us to implement inside the legislature. I think in the coming days we'll continue some conversations with the opposition when they think and then we think, as well as with the Speaker's office and the Legislative Assembly's office, when we think we can start to begin to move forward with more traditional legislation inside the legislature and going back to a little bit of semi-normal to this place. I think like any other business across the province, the reality is we're going to have to put in and have put in measures that are going to be the new normal to the Alberta legislature for a while as far as social distancing and hygiene practices. But we are getting closer to the ability to do that and then to be able to return to business as normal. The other factor on that is we've been clear that we're going to bring a financial and fiscal update. Minister Taves will. And the reality is we think that, for that to be effective, we need to know more facts about how this is developing both here locally but worldwide on the economic situation. And I anticipate that the earliest that we can do that fiscal update would be late June or early July. So that will factor into some of my decision-making processes here as we know those timelines better so that I can effectively use the time of the legislature to be able to do as much Alberta business as we can.
Do you have a follow-up, Catherine?
Yeah, and I'm not sure how much you're allowed to speak to this, but with the Legislative Priorities Committee, it seems that some of the non-emergency bills that are coming forward are the type of bills that the opposition can agree to. For example, the human trafficking bill. I'm wondering when we might again see bills like Bill 1 be debated. Is that intentionally moved to a lower priority to allow for more consultation, or what's the reasoning behind the order?
We have not stopped our intention to pass Bill 1 inside the legislature. So let me be clear on that. We don't feel it needs to go back to consultation. We've been clear with Albertans our intention on Bill 1, and we will at some point continue on with it. The reality is, though, as the COVID-19 situation developed, we worked with the opposition and indicated to the opposition that we would be lowering, and I want to be clear, they asked us to do this, how many times that we sit and the length of our sitting times to be able to provide social distancing within the legislature and to handle the emergency as best that we can from the legislative perspective. And so in that context, we have been bringing what I think are legislation that in general, outside of emergency legislation, that all members of the House agree with so that we can continue to make progress so that we can ultimately get all the work done that we have to this spring. But out of respect for the opposition who can't have all their members inside the chamber, we haven't been bringing in legislation that they would want to spend more time on. I think we are a couple weeks away from having a conversation, though, where we will return to our regular routine, which is to arrive in Edmonton on Sunday nights and leave on Thursday and spend the entire legislative week focused on our agenda. But we're not quite there yet. We'll continue to consult with, as I said, the opposition, the Speaker's office, and Dr. Hinshaw on when that moment is right, but I think it's sooner than later.
Okay, we'll go to the next question, please.
Our next question comes from Ashley Durano of Post Media. Your line is open.
Hi. I just had a question about the utilities deferment bill. This was something that was brought up in March. So is this legislation just formalizing what was announced in March, or is there something different in this legislation that wasn't already available after the March announcement?
This legislation primarily formalizes what is taking place in March. As you know, I can't get into the specifics of the bill until tomorrow when it's coming into the House, but I do know Minister Nally is having a briefing tomorrow morning, I believe, with the media so he can get more into the specifics. But this is the time sensitivity to it is the reality is that this is something that's already been agreed to and we need to implement the legislation to accomplish what was committed to in March.
Do you have a follow-up?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Super. Okay, we've got one more. Oh, nope, not anymore. Okay. I guess that's it, folks.
Okay, thanks for your time, guys.
Super, thanks.